Hello, friends. Welcome to Read Through the Word. Today is Saturday, September 14th, and we are reading today. Our reading today was in the book of Ezra and one of my favorite books, Esther. I'll have to admit that I love the major prophets. I love how many beautiful things have been tied in. I love the story, these stories as, you know, the Jews are coming back from exile and they're starting to rebuild the temple. I love these stories, but I love when I feel like it's kind of a little break when we get to the book of Esther, just sort of this beautiful story kind of set apart. And so I hope you've enjoyed reading the first 4 chapters of Esther today. And I'm going to choose a really common verse that I think a lot of us know, but I kind of saw it differently when I thought about it for this lesson. So Esther 4:14, if you keep quiet at a time like this, deliverance and relief for the Jews will arise from some other place. But you and your relatives will die. Who knows if perhaps you were made queen for just such a time as this? And that's a famous verse. We know that it had to do with a very wicked plot by Haman to destroy the Jews, and of Esther being chosen to be queen, and for her to approach the king with boldness and great courage when it could have cost her her life, to speak up on behalf of her people. So very brave. And I'm sure many of you have heard this story before. This isn't new. Maybe it's new to you. I hope you've enjoyed it as you first read it. I kind of want to talk about some history, because you know how I love digging into sort of what was going on at that time. What kind of a picture can we get for what was happening during the life of Esther. And so I'm going to start with that. So first of all, scholars consider the earliest date of the authorship of Esther to be around 460 BC, shortly after the narrated events occurred and before Ezra returned to Jerusalem. The latest date suggested is around 350 BC, just before Greece conquered the Persian Empire in 331 BC. And we know in this story that Xerxes, or Ahasuerus, the king, was drinking with, all of his nobles and all these people, and that he asked, after days of drunkenness and supposedly celebration, or what here it says, the Greek historian Herodotus explained that the Persians drank as they deliberated matters of state, believing that intoxication put them closer in touch with the spiritual world. So it wasn't just a party. They were planning. They were plotting. They were plotting for future battles. And of course, they ask Vashti, the king asks Vashti to come out and parade herself during this time. We'll talk about that in a minute. Some other interesting historical points as we're just setting the foundation here. Persian protocol dictated that no one but the king could be left alone with a woman of the royal harem, which we see later that Haman does. Purim, the celebration of what happened with Esther, is still celebrated today. The entire book of Esther is read in the synagogue on the holiday, during which noisemakers are used. People cheer at the sound of Mordecai's name and boo and hiss at the mention of Haman. That sounds like a fun holiday. Susa was the Persian winter capital, and one of Daniel's visions was set in Susa, and Nehemiah also served there. Xerxes was, as we said, the Persian king during this book of Esther. He had planned an invasion of Greece, but was driven from Greece after they were decisively beaten at Plataea in 479 BC. So he suffered some pretty bad military losses to Greece at that time. Xerxes was then succeeded by his son Artaxerxes I, and it was during this reign, the reign of Artaxerxes I, that Ezra and Nehemiah did their work in Jerusalem. So just some history there. So we know that there was this big drunken revelry happening, and they were, supposedly dealing with matters of state. And Vashti is asked to come forth and to parade herself in front of everybody. Now, I have to admit, when I read the book of Esther, sometimes, I don't know, sometimes I've heard teachings or read things that talk about, talk about Vashti almost in a negative light. Like she was, sort of the bad queen and Esther was the good queen. And I'm not really sure that's true. We don't really have, we have the voice of these, men in power who are saying, well, Vashti needs to do everything the king tells her to do because we don't want women to think they can not listen to what's told them. So we should have a new queen. But what were they asking of her? What was he asking of her? He was asking something of her that was really rather degrading. And he was asking something of her selfishly, probably while intoxicated for the benefit of his own pride. And so sometimes I think Vashti gets a bit of a bad rap, but maybe she had just decided, I'm not doing this. And you wonder, did she know that there could be severe consequences for what she did? I'm guessing she did. Maybe she didn't anticipate it. Maybe she did. But either way, the demand upon her to do something that probably felt so degrading to her and to boost up Xerxes' arrogance, she just was not willing to do that. So I just think that's interesting that we're able to see to see different perspectives there. And we know the story of how Esther went through, beauty treatments. It was a whole year. There was all these other women. And again, you look at that part too. The story of Esther can be very romanticized, but I'm not sure that what she went through was very fairy tale like. There's all these other women, and you think of a culture when a harem of women did not have a lot of say. And the king had a lot of power. And so even though Esther was a hero, I do think it's still important for us to realize what she was going through, what it was like, kind of the reality of this situation. I think it's never good to sort of glaze over some of the more difficult parts of history. I decided to do a little bit of digging on this because I thought of both Vashti and Esther, and just the general kind of the general things that happened with them. And when you look back in history, I think it's always interesting that not everything is always cut and dry, black and white. Some things are. We can look at how people worshipped in certain ways or different cultural things of that day. And so I looked back a little bit into Persian history thinking, wow, women must have been horribly mistreated. But that's actually not what I found. It's very interesting. And so again, I want to always have us remember that looking back in history, not everything is easy to just kind of fit into a category about why things happen the way they do. Some things are. Some things I think are just a bit more nuanced is probably the right way to say it. So in the Archaeological Study Bible, it says that Persian royal women could not only attend banquets, but also accompany the king on hunts and even on military campaigns. That's pretty different for ancient times. So I thought that was interesting. I also looked into a bit of history about women in ancient Persia. The World History Encyclopedia says, women in ancient Persia were not only highly respected, but in many cases considered the equal of males. Women could own land, conduct business, receive equal pay, could travel freely on their own. In the case of royal women, hold their own council meetings on policy. Persian women could continue to enjoy the high status in ancient Persian culture until the fall of the Sasanian Empire to the invading Arab Muslims in 671 BC. Afterwards, the long-standing recognition of women as autonomous individuals capable of deciding their own fate was replaced by the concept of women as second-class citizens, inherently sinful and requiring male guidance and control. So I think that's really interesting that through the ages, through different parts of history, there were different cultural things regarding women. And so I was really surprised to find that. Perhaps that's why Vashti was reluctant to do this. Maybe she did have, a very equal standing and thought, I don't have to do this. Maybe it was very surprising to her that Xerxes went ahead and, decided that she would be banished, exiled. Maybe she was killed also. We're not sure. When they say banished or exiled, we don't know if that means she was just ordered to live somewhere else or if she lost her life. And so there's this nuance here of, according to history, there were some there was cultural in general respect for Persian women. And yet in this instance, Vashti lost her position. And what was expected of her did not seem to be treating a woman with respect. Esther obviously was different. She was not Persian. She was Jewish. And so foreigners in Persian culture foreign women would definitely not have enjoyed the same privileges as Persian women. So that could be part of that. But I do think it's just interesting. It always interests me to look in and see what was the culture like? How does that fit in with the story? So there's lots of nuances here. I will say that it made me think about when we have circumstances that are complex around us and we are maybe asked or feel prompted to stand up for something that we think is right or not right, that we want to stand up and say, hey, this is not right. We need to stand up for what's right. And there's lots of different circumstances surrounding that. And we have that today too, where we might want to voice something that we know it will help other people if we stand up and have a voice about it. But at the same time, there could be a lot of cultural things going on around us that make it difficult. So I don't know exactly what the exact atmosphere was for Esther and Vashti. But we do know enough to say that both of these women chose to do something or chose not to do something because they thought it was the right thing. And it was hard. It was very hard. It could have cost Vashti her life. We're not sure. And if it had not gone well, it could have cost Esther her life also. So this made me think of my oldest daughter. Her name is Esther. And I have always loved that name. It's also a family name. But when she was born 20 years ago, I just felt like that was the name that she was to have. And Esther has been through some really difficult things. I asked her permission before talking about her. So just to let you know, she's been through some really tough stuff. And her senior year of high school, she ended up having a concussion and towards the beginning of fall. And it really affected, she was homeschooled, but it really affected her whole entire rest of the year. She still deals with some difficult symptoms from it today, and it has made things like schoolwork more difficult. It has just made some things harder. And yet she persevered, and she is in college now, and through her going through this, she's learned a lot about suffering, and she's also been through some other really difficult things in her life, emotionally, emotional suffering. But now, as she's persevered through going to school and going to college and doing what she loves to do, which is working with little kids, she's working with these young kids, and I'm starting to see in her this strength, this courage that when something is not right, she will stand up and talk about, hey, we need to give these kids a voice, or we need to speak up for somebody that is having a difficulty, somebody else that's having a struggle. I really see her on a daily basis thinking about the needs of others, the suffering of others, or times when, just in general in life, where she knows that something needs to be spoken up for, or someone needs to be spoken up for. And it's been so beautiful to watch that. It's been so hard to watch that. Because like Queen Esther in the Bible, her circumstances have not always been easy. But despite her circumstances, she has chosen to use what's going on around her and what has happened to her. She's used that to help others. And I think that's a beautiful picture. And I think we all could probably see ways that others around us and we ourselves have, in circumstances that are not ideal, we still have done something to help the people around us. And I hope we can continue to do that. I hope we can continue to find ways to bring justice and love and truth and peace and light to people around us, even when our circumstances are not ideal. Thanks for joining me here today, friends, and we'll see you next time on Read Through the Word.